What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 12 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup, so make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear in the comment section. You agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have. We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Today's video is brought to you guys by Birddogs. And look, I know we're all searching for that perfect pair of shorts or pants that offers the best style, the best comfort, the best bang for your buck. Well, guess what? That search is over because Birddogs offers all of that and so much more. If you're looking for shorts, they have a ton of options with activewear, casual wear, or even beachwear. On top of that, their pants have a selection of khakis, joggers, and sweatpants. So what are you waiting for? Regardless of the occasion of the season, get yourself the most stylish, the most comfortable pair of pants with a built-in liner from Birddogs.com. And if you use promo code ADP today, you'll get a free rope hat with your purchase. Again, that's Birddogs.com, code ADP, and you'll get a free rope hat with your purchase. Make sure to check out birddogs.com, link in the description, and we kick off Week 12 on Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. The first of three games, which is the Bills at the Lions. And I do like the wide receivers here as well, not only the running backs. For the Bills, you've got Stephon Diggs, you've got Gabe Davis, and you've got a favorable defensive matchup versus the Detroit Lions. So that's really all you need here, honestly. I mean, Diggs continues to be a top 3, top 5 wide receiver. And then Gabe Davis gives you that high upside, wide receiver too, that he's been since healthy for the Buffalo Bills. For the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the main name here. I anticipate that the Lions will have to pass the ball a bunch versus the Buffalo Bills. And St. Brown, since the departure of TJ Hawkinson, has been an absolute volume monster. I have him as a low-end wide receiver 1. Then there's likely going to be a second name here for the Detroit Lions. Now, trying to break it down, Josh Reynolds coming back healthy, supposedly, he'd be my pick. He's probably going to be a low-end wide receiver 2, really any one of these guys. That's the next guy up after Amon-Ra. If Josh Reynolds doesn't play, to me, it would be Khalif Raymond. And I do have rookie Jameson Williams' name, finally showing up here for the first time this year. He is currently a sit. He was designated to return from IR, but that doesn't mean he's going to return immediately this week. So keep that in mind. If he somehow does suit up this week, then, obviously the Lions believe that he can contribute right away, and then he's, healthy enough. And they did make him a first-round selection after all, so I would start him above all those guys in terms of Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond, but he probably would be more boom or bust than all of them, so do keep that in mind. Then Giants at the Cowboys. As crazy as it sounds, I finally have a New York Giant wide receiver listed as a start. That is Darius Slayton. Not because, I think that he's extremely talented or that I'm a Daniel Jones believer. No, it's because literally, every single Giants wide receiver is hurt. They trade away Kadarius Toney. Then Wendell Robinson, injury done for the season. Kenny Golladay hasn't done anything since he joined the New York Giants. So kind of Darius Slayton is that next guy up. He got a lot of volume this last week. To me, honestly, more than anything, he is purely a volume play. So I'm looking at him in PPR formats. And with that being said, I still believe he is boom or bust because, again, I don't believe in the Giants passing attack and I don't believe in Daniel Jones from that passing perspective. So keep all of that in mind. For the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, he's a wide receiver 1. The Cowboys aren't going to be blowing out a team by 30-plus points as quickly as they did last week versus the Minnesota Vikings. So that was kind of the reason why CeeDee Lamb didn't have an extraordinary game. He didn't need to. So I do think he will bounce back. And then Michael Gallup I have as a sit. It's kind of been Dalton Schultz as the number 2, then the rushing attack. So to me, Michael Gallup is a sit here for the Cowboys. Afterwards, Pats at the Vikings. For the Patriots, It has been and it will continue to really only be Jacoby Myers. The Patriots can't sustain more than one fantasy relevant wide receiver, but thankfully it's been a clear-cut number one guy. Mostly a PPR start, but a start nonetheless. Jacoby Myers in PPR formats to me is in that low-end wide receiver 2 kind of category, maybe high-end wide receiver 3, but the floor is pretty high. For the Vikings, Justin Jefferson, again, it's not going to be every single week where the Vikings just literally cannot do anything offensively. I think they're going to bounce back here. I think Justin Jefferson will bounce back. You start him. He's a top 5 wide receiver every single week. Then Adam Thielen, maybe a bit of a surprise. I have him as a sit. I kind of look at it, and I do think since TJ Hawkinson joined the Vikings, he's been getting more and more targets, as has been kind of getting accustomed to the offense. And I think that hurts Adam Thielen more than anyone else. Also, I anticipate the Vikings rushing attack to be more involved here. So I think Thielen could potentially be a little bit too risky. For that reason, I'd prefer to sit him. Then Texans at the Dolphins. Might sound absolutely bananas, but I have 2 Texans wide receivers as starts. Now, don't get me wrong. Texans are going to lose this game, 1,000%. But they're going to have to throw a bunch to, pretend to be in this game versus the Miami Dolphins. Now, sure, Brendan Cooks is my preferred start, but I think Nico Collins can see some volume, something in the realms of, maybe 6 catches for 50, 60 yards. Honestly, similar type of situation in Brendan Cooks. And if you look at it from a pre-PPR perspective, that's around 11-ish points. If you get a touchdown somehow, then that's just gravy. So to me, both these guys are kind of in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 category, though. So it's going to be a boom or bust situation. Let's get that out of the way. For Miami, Tyreek, Jalen versus this god-awful Texans defense. The only thing that can limit these guys is if the Dolphins just run it down the throat, play after play versus the Texans. But other than that, Hill and Waddle both wide receiver 1s. Moving on, Bengals at the Titans. Is this finally the week where we see Jamar Chase returning? Now, I have my reservations about that. There's reports that he comes back, so, we're going to entertain that. If he plays, obviously you're going to start him. Then afterwards, it's T. Higgins, and I do think Tyler Boyd, he's been a start in my eyes since Jamar Chase has been out. Now he becomes a sit. I'm not saying that he won't have good weeks. Sure he will, but to me, he is just too tough to trust when Jamar Chase is in those lineups. For the Titans, Treylon Burks, he returned from his injury stint, and he got a lot of volume. He was, the most trusted wide receiver. So I think he can be a volume play here, similar to some of these other wide receivers that we've mentioned in that category. And I do think the Titans are going to have to throw here to keep pace with the Bengals. So to me, Treylon Burks, again, probably in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range. And I'm sitting Robert Woods. I'm sitting really all the other Tennessee wide receivers. Now that Burks is back healthy, really don't want anything to do with them, considering the Titans are also a run-first team with Derrick Henry. Then Broncos at the Panthers. I'm only starting the 2 top guys here. That's Courtland Sutton for the Broncos. Even if Jerry Jeudy plays, I'm not confident enough in this Broncos offense. And I'd only really take a chance on Courtland Sutton as the top guy. Even with that, he is boomer bust, unfortunately. We have to say that with the way Russell Wilson has played. So he's in that, low to mid-level wide receiver 2 category. For Carolina, the big news, Sam Darnold is going to start for them. And weirdly enough, I think this is the best quarterback option the Carolina Panthers have had. I wouldn't be shocked if they win this game. But Sam Darnold, to me, he can actually air out the football. He's not afraid to do so. I'm not saying that, he's not going to turn over the football, but this is a good thing for DJ Moore. Moore was putting up stats with Sam Darnold last year, albeit in losses. I think that DJ Moore now kind of returns to a high-end wide receiver too. But again, this is probably short-term. We'll see what happens moving forward. Then Bears at the Jets. A lot to talk about in this game. Justin Fields dealing with a shoulder injury, and it could very well be the Trevor Siemian show. And if that's the case, then that's nothing to get excited about here for the Bears. Without Justin Fields, I think you can't really trust anyone here regardless. So Darnell Mooney, that's why you see him as a sit. For the Jets, another quarterback situation to monitor here. There is no commitment to Zach Wilson being the starting quarterback, which means if that's the case, I'm actually excited about this Jets offense. If it's Joe Flacco, we saw what Joe Flacco did with a Garrett Wilson at the start of the season. And I would start Garrett Wilson in that scenario. If it's Zach Wilson, I don't have enough faith. Sure, there could be a guy, and on paper, it's a good matchup versus this Bears defense. But again, I just don't believe in Zach Wilson. So if it's Wilson under center, I'd be avoiding, really this matchup as a whole. But if it's somebody like a Joe Flacco, well, I know I've seen some people say, okay, it's Elijah Moore season. Folks, we saw it at the start of the season. It wasn't Elijah Moore season then when Joe Flacco was under center. It ain't going to be Elijah Moore season now. So I have Moore and Corey Davis as sits. Afterwards, Falcons at the Commanders. I'm really only interested in Terry McLaurin here. I think it's a good matchup versus this Falcons defense. The reason why I have Curtis Samuel as a sit, again, it's a good matchup. I could see him having a good game. I think it's just a little bit too risky because, to me, we've seen what opposing defenses do versus this Falcons defense on the ground. I think it's going to be a big Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson type of day. That's why, to me, Curtis Samuel is kind of going to be behind the pecking order from that perspective, why I have him as a sit. And then Drake London, maybe a surprising sit, especially with Kyle Pitts out for probably the rest of the season. You got to throw it to someone. Problem is, the Falcons aren't a high-volume passing offense. Drake London, even last week, when Kyle Pitts was hurt, barely saw any volume. To me, he is a sit. I just don't trust the Falcons' offense from a passing perspective. Then Bucs at the Browns, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. You start them. This Browns defense, not really all that scary. So I like both these guys as high-end wide receiver twos. For the Browns, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones. You're going to continue to start them. Amari Cooper, I think, obviously has the higher upside, but DPJ has been very, very solid since pretty much the midpoint of the season. I think he's a solid, mid-level wide receiver too. Then looking at the sits, Julio Jones, Russell Gage, even if they're healthy, I just don't trust them. There's a big drop-off here. And also the Browns haven't been all that great versus the run. Maybe this is the game where we see a big Leonard Fournette or Rachaad White type of, performance. So I think it's going to be that type of focus there for the Bucs. I'm sitting Jones and Gage. Next up, we've got the Ravens at the Jaguars. Here, I would start Demarcus Robinson. These last couple of weeks, he's emerged as the number one wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. Without Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay not really doing all that much. So, I think Robinson could be a decent volume play. Now, again, he's probably going to be a bit boomer bust because the Ravens, through the air, not as consistent as we would like, but I would take a chance on him. To me, he's in that wide receiver 2 low-end category. For the Jaguars, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones. I have both of them listed as starts. While the Ravens are a decent defense, I do think they can be kind of taken advantage of through the air. Kirk, he's been the number one wide receiver for the Jags. He's been very good this season. He's a high-end wide receiver 2. I think Zay Jones can be that sneaky low-end wide receiver 2. And then Marvin Jones, just too much. That would be getting excessive, and Duvernay is a sit, just hasn't been getting enough volume as of late for the Ravens. Afterwards, Raiders at the Seahawks. I only really want to start Devontae Adams for the Raiders. The good thing is he's been a locked and loaded top 5 wide receiver, just getting all the volume. So you like to see that. I wouldn't get too cute with Mac Hollins. I know he saw some decent targets this last week, but again, I just can't trust this Raiders offense enough, so I'd rather sit him. For the Seahawks, Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, I think they're both solid mid-level wide receiver 2s. The Raiders defense doesn't scare me, so I would start both of them. Then Chargers at the Cardinals. So Keenan Allen came back last week, didn't get injured. That's the good news. I think as the season goes on, with him being on the field, he's going to get more and more involved, so I have him as a start. Mike Williams, though, re-injures his ankle. We'll see if he plays. If he does, I would start him, and then probably Josh Palmer is a sit, even though that's what we said last week, and he puts up 30 points, go figure. If Williams doesn't play, I think Josh Palmer is a solid wide receiver too, and I would start him. But if Allen and Williams are both available, it's tough to start Josh Palmer. I don't think he's usurped Allen or Mike Williams as the number 2 on this team, so that's the main reason. For the Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins, you start him regardless of the quarterback. But speaking of the quarterback, Kyler Murray, again, considering that the Cardinals have a bye next week, might not play here if the Cardinals want to be cautious with him. If so, it's going to be Colt McCoy. That's a tough situation. Marquise Brown could return here. That's why you see his name with an asterisk as a potential start. If he does play, I wouldn't be playing Greg Dortch, who had a lot of success this last week with McCoy. But I just think it's going to be Hopkins and Marquise Brown. If I had to guess, I'd probably say both Murray and Marquise Brown don't play. They come back after the bye week. In that scenario, I would take a dart throw on Greg Dortch. We saw Colt McCoy go his way a bunch. Rondale Moore banged up. So only in those scenarios would I start Greg Dortch. Afterwards, Saints at the 49ers. For the Saints, this has been the case pretty much all season long. Olave is the only valid start. He is a high-end wide receiver 2. I'm sitting Jarvis Landry. Other than the touchdown he had this last week, didn't do all that much. For the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, I think they can both have success. And, we've been seeing it. So, to me, Deebo Samuel is in that mid to high-end wide receiver 2 type of category because of what he can do with his legs on the ground as a rusher. For Brandon Ayuk, probably low to mid-level wide receiver 2. Then Rams at the Chiefs. I feel kind of dirty about this one. I have 2 Rams wide receivers listed as starts without Cooper Kupp. Allen Robinson is the main guy, but the reason I have Van Jefferson also listed is because the Rams are going up against the Chiefs. They're going to have to air out the football. Van Jefferson is that deep play type of guy. I could see him getting behind the defense and having a long touchdown type of situation. So on top of that, he's been getting more volume. I still think he's kind of a high-end wide receiver 3 in a boomer bust type of play. But if you're desperate, I do think he could be a positive game script for the Chiefs. I only really trust Juju Smith-Schuster as far as these wide receivers are concerned, but we don't know if he's going to play. He missed last week due to his concussion. So if he returns, I'll play him. If not, I don't want to get too cute with MVS or with Sky Moore. It's going to be the ground game. It's going to be Travis Kelce, and it's going to be spreading out the football in general. So without Juju, I'm not taking a chance on these other wide receivers. Then Packers at the Eagles. We finally have 2 Packers wide receivers as starts, Allen Lazard, Christian Watson. Even though Lazard has been kind of disappointing these last couple of weeks, he's still getting the volume, and I like to see that. Maybe you just have to adjust how you value him, and maybe now that's a low-end wide receiver too, and Christian Watson, kind of emerging. A mid-level wide receiver 2, decent touchdown upside as well. So I have both of them as starts. I think the Packers are going to have to pass a bunch versus this Eagles offense. For Philly, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. I think they're both solid starts here. This Packers defense has been underwhelming. So I would start both of them. Brown, wide receiver 1 potential. Devonta Smith, high upside wide receiver 2. Afterwards, Steelers at the Colts. Again, this one's a risk, but I have George Pickens as a start. He's been getting some decent volume. Deontay Johnson, weirdly enough, these last couple of weeks has been disappointing in the volume department. So I think, honestly, whichever one of these wide receivers you start, whether it's Pickens, whether it's Deontay Johnson, they're both boomer bust. So you could make the argument that, they should both be sits. I'm looking at the Colts matchup. It doesn't scare me too much, so that's why maybe I'm a little bit bold here. But again, I think whichever one of these Steelers wide receivers you go with, they're kind of in that boomer bust low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 category. For the Colts, Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell. I mean, with Matt Ryan under center, Paris Campbell has been getting like around 10 to 11 fantasy points per week. If we're talking PPR, that does bring some value, so I think he can continue that. And then Michael Pittman, his value has returned as well, low to mid-level wide receiver 2. I think he continues that this week. But with that, we wrap up our Week 12 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.